the midst of World War II, British bombers were returning from action damaged by anti-aircraft fire. The Royal Air Force wanted to protect their planes and so started reinforcing the areas that were receiving the most damage. However, adding that reinforcement didn't seem to help. The same percentage of bombers continued to be lost. They then asked a statistician called Abraham Wald to help, and Wald suggested that the RAF reinforced the areas on the bombers that were receiving the least damage. And amazingly, that worked. The survival rate of the aircraft improved. But why? Wald realised that the planes returning were not representative of all the planes going into action. Planes that received damage in other areas were more likely to crash and so less likely to return. The planes that returned were those receiving non-lethal damage. They showed which parts of the aircraft could be damaged without losing the aircraft. The previous thinking about those military planes provides a classic example of a bias that can lead us away from the truth. It's called selection bias. Selection bias involves making a judgment about all the so-and-sos based on an unrepresentative sample. The planes returning from action were not representative of all the planes going into action, and that's what led the investigators astray. This is a dramatic illustration of how reasoning errors can be costly and of how critical thinking can actually save lives. In fact, this same insight about selection bias might help a business too. Suppose a company sends out an email to customers asking for feedback on a product. The feedback that comes back is mostly negative, and so the business concludes that most customers are unhappy with that product. The trouble with this survey is that those customers who return their feedback might not be typical. In fact, customers who are most unhappy are likely to be those most motivated to return their feedback forms with negative comments on. But then they're not going to be representative of all customers. If the business fails to spot this, it might end up dropping a product that a majority of its customers actually like. That completes this introductory section. You should now have a much clearer grasp of the overall structure of the course and the value of critical thinking. In the next section, we're going to turn to one of the most obvious ways of showing that a belief is reasonable, by giving an argument for it.